Hey guys, I'm Matt, a developer from Ohio. In this video, we're going to ask and answer, what is the DOM? If you've done any web development, you probably at least heard the term. We're going to explain what the DOM actually is, learn what it looks like, figure out how to use it, and most importantly, why you should care about the DOM at all. So, what is it? Well, most of the information we need is right in the name. DOM is an acronym, which stands for Document, Object, Model. In a broad sense, the document object model is the browser's internal representation of a web page. Every page relies on a DOM to spell out exactly what stuff should be on the page, and how that stuff relates to all the other stuff. To understand more about what the DOM is, let's take a look at each part individually. You may have heard web pages referred to simply as documents. The word document really just refers to any way of structuring information. Articles, books, scientific papers, whatever. But from a web development point of view, document is another word for web page. So the DOM is a model of all the stuff on a web page, or document. The stuff on a web page is objects, or at least that's what the DOM calls them. You may have also heard the term nodes or elements used to describe the stuff on a web page. These are types of objects, but what are these objects exactly? Well, the most obvious kind of stuff on a web page is the content. Every page has words. Content also includes images, videos, buttons, etc. All of those things are considered objects. You may have also heard this stuff referred to as elements, which is a specific kind of object. Another kind of stuff is structural elements, which are things like divs, containers, and sections. You may or may not be able to actually see all the structural objects on a web page, but they're needed to organize the content. The remaining stuff is mostly attributes. Every element has attributes. For example, HTML elements can have classes, styles, sizes, etc. All of these attributes are objects in the document object model, but they aren't elements like content or structure. The M in DOM is model. A model is a representation of something, and it helps us understand how that something is put together. There are models for anything you could think of, because complex things need some way to be universally understood, analyzed, and used. I'm sure you've seen blueprints, floor plans, IKEA directions, recipes. These kinds of models are instructions. They depict the objects in enough detail that someone can recreate the objects. Another kind of model is more like a summary of big ideas or complex systems. You can't build a galaxy, so you don't need instructions per se, but you can understand it with the help of models. So then, what kinds of models do we have as web developers? We have the DOM, which is a model of web pages. We'll see soon how it acts as a set of instructions for the browser to follow, and as a summary of web pages for us to read. So what is the DOM? It's a way to model the objects in a document. Or, in simpler terms, the DOM represents the elements and attributes on a web page. Now that we know what it is, let's take a look at what it looks like. The DOM is a kind of data structure called a tree. All that means is that every object is hierarchically under another object. An object can have multiple children, but only one parent. When we talk about parents and children, we're referring to the relationships between objects. Child objects are under or within parent objects. You might even say that a parent object sort of owns its list of children. If we were to remove any object from this tree, all of its children, and their children, and their children's children, would all be removed as well. A tree graph can be used to represent all sorts of models. For example, we can try to represent a galaxy, like I mentioned earlier. The top object, the parent of all parents, will be our galaxy itself. This position in the tree is known as the root node. The children of the Milky Way are its stars. There are obviously way more than 2 of these in our galaxy, but our model doesn't have to cover absolutely everything. Our star is called Sol, which is why we refer to our system as the solar system. The children of the solar system are its planets and other space stuff that orbits around the sun. Again, I'm not showing every orbital body here. It's important to realize that the children of an object don't have to be the same type of stuff. Here we have 2 planets and an asteroid belt. Under Earth are planetary sections, like continents and oceans. We could go down and down this tree until we're talking about particles, but I think you get the idea by now. So let's take this model of a galaxy and turn it into a model of a website. A website, or document, is structured in the same way as a galaxy. If you've written any HTML, you know that the HTML tag is at the top of the file, then head and body. In this example, we have a pretty standard website with a header, main section, and footer. In the header, there's a logo, a heading, and a navigation section. And let's not forget that attributes are objects too. The image is going to need a source attribute to reference a PNG or something. Every one of these things is an object, and every object has exactly one parent. This is the DOM. Or at least, it's one way of visualizing the DOM. So what does the DOM look like in real life? I mean, you won't see a tree like this in your code or in a browser. In my opinion, the best way to visualize a real website's DOM is to open up the developer tools in your browser. This is an image from Chrome's Inspect Element feature. This list of tags may not look like a tree structure at first glance, but it's the exact same information as our graph. Every indentation level in the inspector is a vertical level from the graph. The buttons to the left of some tags hide even more children than we can see here. So, we still see that source is an attribute of image, which is a child of header, which is a child of body, which is a child of HTML. This is probably the most common way to visualize a DOM, because it looks just like HTML. Most web developers can read HTML, so it's helpful to see the document in a familiar format. Plus, because it's built into the browser, it's super easy to access. So, is the DOM HTML? This is a common misconception, because the most common way of viewing the DOM looks like HTML. But there are more ways to create a document than just HTML. Lots of technologies can be used. You can use PHP to generate HTML when the page is loaded. Or you could use JavaScript to edit DOM elements on the fly. You can even use technologies like React or Angular to generate entire pages without writing any HTML. So the DOM isn't HTML. The DOM can be represented by HTML, just like it can be represented by the tree graph. These are formats that the DOM can be viewed in, but the DOM itself is the underlying data structure of objects that make up the document. Let's take a look at some ways to view the DOM. As we've seen, we can represent the DOM with this tree graph. This is the best way to graphically represent the DOM's actual data structure, but it's not very helpful when trying to write code. It can also be represented in the browser's developer tools, which I mentioned is probably the most common way. The Inspect Element tool allows us to see the document in a way that more closely resembles a web developer's understanding of web pages, in that it reads like HTML. Source code is another representation of the same document. We could figure out how a web page will look by reading the entire source, but tools like Inspect Element were created specifically so we wouldn't have to. The source code is, however, the only way of viewing the document that allows us to edit the document. It's a lot like how a musician can know what a song sounds like from its sheet music, or how an architect might know what a building looks like from its floor plan. These are all representations of a specific thing. And just like how we can know what a web page will look like based on the tree graph, developer tools, source code, the browser also knows what it'll look like. The rendered web page is another representation of the same document. We can edit the DOM via source code. A browser reads the DOM in order to render the web page. Because we can control the DOM with our source code, we can control the rendered web page. If you recall, I said earlier that a model can be either a set of instructions or a description. For a browser, the DOM is a set of instructions on how to build a specific web page. For a developer, the DOM is a readable description of those instructions. So, how is that visualization useful to you as a developer? Now that you know how to visualize and understand the DOM, you can more easily control the instructions sent to a browser. No matter what language, library, or framework you're using, if you're changing something on a web page, you're using the DOM. Hey, thanks for watching. You can join the conversation by subscribing to this channel or dropping a comment below. And if you want to take your skills to the next level, you can start learning on Codecademy today.